The wind tore through the streets of Elmsworth, a forgotten town along the Mississippi, rattling shutters like ghostly fingers. At 3 a.m., the residents whispered of a scream that had no origin, a sound swallowed by the fog rolling from the river. Sister Beatrice, aged 51, was gone. Only her Bible remained, open on the altar with a child's handprint smeared across the pages. No one knew where she had gone or why. Some claimed they saw her walking barefoot into the woods, eyes glassy, murmuring of visions that promised salvation. But the truth was far darker, hidden behind the towering brick walls of St. Agnes Orphanage, where secrets had been cultivated for generations. The missing nun was not merely a disappearance, she was a symptom of the institution's rot, the unspoken sins buried beneath the veneer of piety. Built in 1823, St. Agnes Orphanage was a monument to sanctity and discipline, yet its foundations were soaked in blood, sweat, and unacknowledged despair. Orphans spoke in hushed tones of the hidden wing, a cold corridor where shadows clung to the walls and whispers bled through the brick. Their children vanished, sometimes for hours, sometimes for weeks, only to return changed, eyes hollow, voices stifled. Sister Beatrice's arrival in 1882 marked the beginning of a new era, one where the orphanage's darkest rituals intertwined with her unwavering faith. Townsfolk rarely visited, leaving the girls alone with strict rules, a hierarchy of fear, and the looming authority of their caretakers. Behind stained glass and candlelight, something unnatural fermented. Power exercised not through prayer but through silence, obedience, and unchallenged terror. Beatrice was not always feared. She was once known for her compassion. Born in 1831 to a devout family, she had survived the fever years, the fires that took countless siblings, and the relentless moralistic gaze of the church. At 21, she had joined the convent, bringing with her a reputation for miracles, small, inexplicable acts that inspired awe. But decades in the shadow of institutional authority transformed that awe into control. Her faith had hardened into doctrine, and doctrine into ritual. By the time she reached 51, Beatrice had become a figure both revered and quietly dreaded, her actions inscrutable to those outside the cloistered walls. And yet beneath the stoicism lay a latent hunger for absolution, or perhaps power, ready to be awakened by an unexpected catalyst. A young African-American servant, a boy no older than 16, brought in from the nearby plantations under mysterious circumstances. Elijah, a boy whose family had been enslaved along the Mississippi Delta, arrived at St. Agnes in 1883. His eyes, unnaturally observant, betrayed a mind shaped by trauma and survival. He was tasked with menial chores, cleaning the chapel, sweeping floors, and polishing the brass candlesticks. But the orphans whispered of something different, that Beatrice had begun visiting him in secret, taking him into forbidden corners of the orphanage under the guise of spiritual mentorship. Shadows lengthened when they were together, as though the air itself recoiled from their presence. Elijah became both a pupil and a mirror, reflecting hidden truths that the convent had buried long ago. Slowly an unsettling bond emerged, one that would awaken ancient, almost mythic impulses buried within Beatrice and the institution itself. Beatrice had always maintained strict observances, but behind the litany of prayer she practiced rituals no scripture could justify. The orphans believed in the circle of light, a secretive ceremony conducted in the hidden wing. Candles burned in patterns that resembled eyes watching from the dark. Whispered chants in Latin were punctuated by scratching noises, the sound of nails or claws against stone. When Elijah participated, it was always as an obedient witness, though his presence sparked something she could not name. The air thickened, charged with an energy neither holy nor human, a force that whispered promises of creation and destruction. Those who glimpsed these ceremonies swore they saw her hands stained with substances unidentifiable, her eyes reflecting a fervor that was terrifying, devout, and profoundly wrong. The unthinkable happened. Sister Beatrice became pregnant. Townsfolk whispered immediately, some believing it a divine blessing, others a curse. In her private confessions, Beatrice described visions in which God himself had chosen Elijah as a vessel of purity, a conduit of sacred life. But the truth was far darker. There was no heavenly orchestration, only the culmination of decades of repression, desire, and institutionalized power. The pregnancy scandalized the orphanage's hierarchy, yet outwardly Beatrice cloaked it in prayer and ritual. The child growing within her was not just a physical being. It was a symbol of the corruption festering behind sacred walls, a testament to the unchallenged authority of the clergy over the vulnerable. Elmsworth's residents had long murmured about St. Agnes, but the nun's pregnancy became an obsession. Market women whispered in the square. Priests avoided eye contact, and letters were sent in secret, pleading for investigation. Yet no authority dared intrude. The convent's reputation was untouchable. Beatrice, aware of the scrutiny, performed with heightened devotion, her sermons more fervent, her hands clasped more tightly, her eyes alight with a fanatic glow. Some claimed they glimpsed Elijah at the convent after hours, disappearing into the shadows of the chapel, re-emerging pale and silent. Every whispered rumor, every curious glance, seemed to feed the institution's sense of untouchable secrecy, strengthening the walls that would eventually hide the greatest horror of all. Few had entered the hidden wing and returned unchanged. It was here that Beatrice retreated during the night, candlelight flickering across peeling frescoes and crucifixes. The air smelled of wax, damp stone, and something acrid, almost metallic. Elijah followed her silently, guided by unspoken commands. The walls themselves seemed alive, groaning under the weight of years of suppressed confessions. Here in these shadowed halls they enacted a series of private rites, blending religious symbolism with disturbing acts of control and domination. The orphans, forbidden from this wing, sometimes pressed their ears to the doors, catching the sounds of whispered prayers that twisted into moans, and footsteps that circled as though tracking invisible prey. Both Beatrice and Elijah began to change. The nun, once revered for compassion, exhibited paranoia and an obsessive focus on purity and sin. Her journal, hidden in a hollowed cross, chronicled visions of fire, plague, and redemption, but always with Elijah at the center, described as both her sin and her salvation. The boy's demeanor shifted as well, oscillating between terrified obedience and eerie serenity. He began speaking in tongues during solitary hours, often staring for long periods at stained glass windows depicting martyrdom and sacrifice. The hidden wing had become a crucible for psychological corruption, blending trauma, faith, and forbidden desire into something neither fully human nor divine. It was the young orphan Clara who vanished first. She had been exploring the convent after hours, drawn by the flickering candlelight beneath the hidden wing door. Her scream echoed, then abruptly stopped. When the caretakers found the hallway empty, only a shadow remained etched into the wooden floor like a scorched imprint. No trace of Clara was ever found, save for a diary entry in her handwriting, describing a woman who whispers promises in the dark, and a boy who carries the weight of God like fire in his eyes. The incident was quietly buried, explained away as a runaway, a child lost to imagination or mischief. But the orphans whispered, and fear took root in hearts too young to understand the full scope of what had happened. Elmsworth continued its slow, uneasy dance with denial. Priests wrote letters of inquiry that never arrived. Families kept their children at a cautious distance. Yet commerce, social norms, and unquestioned reverence for the convent allowed the horrors within St. Agnes to persist. Church leaders visited for appearances, glancing at Beatrice with thinly veiled suspicion but never daring to challenge her. The pattern was clear. Institutions protect themselves over their charges, hide their sins beneath ritual and facade. St. Agnes had become a living metaphor for unchecked power, its corridors stretching like tentacles into the town's collective psyche, quietly influencing lives beyond the brick walls. Beatrice often spoke of visions that predated her birth, dreams in which angels and demons coexisted in a single body. She believed the pregnancy to be a continuation of something older, an ancient lineage of sin and sanctity intertwined. Some historians might later call it folklore, whispers of a hidden order of the veil, women tasked with birthing divine children who carried the burden of both purity and corruption. In the convent, the symbolism manifested in architecture: triangular windows for Trinity, circular halls for eternity, and hidden alcoves designed for secret rituals. Every brick, every carving seemed to hum with the weight of history, both sacred and profane. Another child disappeared. Thomas, a boy of 10, last seen delivering firewood to the hidden wing. Screams, shadows, and inexplicable cold marked the corridor. Only his shoes remained, neatly lined at the doorway, as though the boy had vanished into another plane. Orphans whispered of spectral figures, Beatrice and Elijah, hovering over an altar in the darkness. The psychological toll on the remaining children was profound. Nightmares, muteness, obsessive rituals of their own making. Fear had become generational, a cycle of terror passed down silently, stitched into the orphanage's walls as surely as mortar. Rumors of demonic possession, divine prophecy, and forbidden love spread like wildfire through Elmsworth. Parents warned children not to cross the river or speak to servants. Midwives refused work at St. Agnes. Travelers reported hearing chants at night, and some swore they saw Beatrice walking barefoot along the riverbank, carrying her unborn child and murmuring prayers that chilled the soul. Fear blended with fascination. The line between horror and legend blurred. Town meetings debated whether to intervene, yet always fell into paralysis, trapped by the weight of religious authority and the allure of whispered miracles. Beatrice's condition advanced, her body bearing the physical evidence of the unnatural union. Elijah remained a shadow at her side, silent, inscrutable. The child's birth approached with a combination of dread and anticipation. Orphans reported strange events, mirrors cracking spontaneously, animals behaving erratically, the air thick with oppressive heat despite the season. Beatrice's sermons grew darker, warning of sin, judgment, and the burden of sacred inheritance. Few could articulate the terror that hung in the air, but all sensed it. Something was about to be unleashed, something that would alter St. Agnes, and perhaps Elmsworth, forever. On a storm-laden night in 1884, the child was born in the hidden wing. No midwife, no medical professional, only Beatrice and Elijah. The orphans later described hearing cries that were not entirely human, as if the newborn carried with it a memory of ancient suffering. Candles burned blue, shadows twisted unnaturally, and the walls seemed to pulse. Beatrice declared the child a divine blessing, a savior and curse entwined. Yet even in her triumph, there were signs of madness. She spoke of the infant as an oracle, a being who could see through time, judge sin, and punish unworthiness. The child's presence marked the culmination of decades of corruption, obsession, and hidden trauma. The institution's hierarchy scrambled to contain scandal. The town's curiosity was satisfied with vague stories of miraculous births and unexplainable events. Beatrice disappeared shortly after, rumored to have fled into the woods carrying the child. Elijah vanished as well, leaving behind only cryptic journal entries and the lingering sense of fear. St. Agnes continued to operate, its hidden wing sealed, its orphans indoctrinated into silence. The legacy of horror, though obscured, remained, a testament to how power and secrecy could bend faith into a weapon of psychological torment. Those who had survived the orphanage carried its weight into adulthood. Stories of lost children, unexplained, pregnancies and forbidden rituals became whispered family secrets. Mental illness, fear of the church, and nightmares haunted generations. The child born of Beatrice and Elijah was never seen again, yet legends claimed its presence could still be felt during thunderstorms, when the river's fog rolled thick and the candlelight flickered across empty hallways. St. Agnes became a symbol, both literal and metaphorical, of the destructive power of hidden corruption. The pregnancy, the disappearances, and the shadowed rituals reflected centuries of institutional control, repression, and abuse. Each brick in the orphanage, every shadowed corridor, and every whispered prayer was a reminder. Trauma, when unacknowledged, does not die. It mutates, feeding on secrecy and faith, twisted into fear. Today, the ruins of St. Agnes stand abandoned, moss climbing its walls, windows shattered, and halls echoing with the whispers of the past. Locals speak of shadows moving within, candles flickering despite no one being present, and a chill that gnaws at the bones. The story of Beatrice, Elijah, and the divine child is mostly forgotten, drowned by time, myth, and denial. But the terror they unleashed lingers, a psychological haunt that proves one truth. Faith, when wielded as a tool of control and desire, can create horrors no history book dares fully to tell.